This episode was made possible thanks to generous supporters on Patreon.
This is the fourth part of the mini-series that I'm making for the so-called luxury chords. So if you haven't watched the previous episode, you can do so on the links down in the description. In the previous episodes, I addressed the 7th, the 9th, and the 11th chords. And today it's time for the top level, the 13 chords. But don't worry, this doesn't mean that the luxury chords are ending here. So stay tuned for the other parts as well. Now with the increasing number of notes, of course, we get exponentially increasing number of chords. And just like with the previous episode, I will just focus on the most common 13 chords and I won't list just infinite number of useless variations. Just like with the 9th and the 11th, we can think of the interval 13th as a simpler interval but raised by an octave. Normally the 6th degree within a chord is a major sixth, which means that if you need this interval, you would rather need to use a flat sign. Although this turns out to be somewhat exotic, I still can't understand why, but people just prefer to write flat 13 instead of flat 6. And I still see no logical reason why you can just use flat 6. Nevertheless, the 6 chords are very popular in jazz, especially in gypsy jazz, and even more especially when it comes to minor 6 chords. We build those by taking a minor thread and then putting the 6th on top of that, and in this case I will start with the flat 6, which creates this beautiful chord that I call the X-Files chords because of and you can see how this flat 6 adds very mild anxiety to the chord, and I guess this is the reason why they use it for this kind of series. Having that flat 6 means that we're going to use a scale that also has a flat 6, and therefore our choice is limited to Aeolian, Phrygian, and harmonic minor. Now when it comes to the more popular minor 6 chord, it's the minor thread with the major 6 on top. And this is what I call the Django Reinhardt chord, because it's something that appears quite extensively in gypsy jazz, also known as manouche. And here's a good example of that. The reason why Django played so much of this minor 6 chord is because of hand injury due to fire accidents, and basically these 2 fingers got mostly paralyzed, and he was capable of using predominantly these 2 fingers, and he needed to develop his own unique style, and this is how we came up with this shape of a minor chord, which essentially is minor 6. And having this degree in the chord again limits us to the choice of Dorian mode, Hungarian minor, and melodic minor. When it comes to the major chords, we approach them the same way by starting with the triad, major triad in this case, and we add the major sixth on top. And this is how we get something that I called Chet Atkins chord, because he has a beautiful fingerstyle version of the Chordettes song Mr. Sandman, and it goes like that. This major sixth chord fits every position in the key tonic, subdominant, and dominant, because the sixth degree actually corresponds to the root of the relative minor of each of these functions, and therefore you can just treat it like a regular major chord and use all the scales that go with them. Before we move to the complex stuff, we need to address two special cases, which are the so-called 6-9 chords.
Oh, okay. I see what you did there.
And these are just 6 chords with an added 9 on top. And first we start with the minor chord, which is minor 6 added 9. And this is again something that I call a stink chord, because it appears in the track It's Probably Me in the original album version, and it goes like this. It's quite a crime story type of vibe that you get from this chord. So in case you get inspired by detective stories and you decide to do some music about it, that's your chord. And just like the Django chord, you can just use the same scales here, the Dorian, the Hungarian minor, and the melodic minor. The major version differs only by the third degree, so we've got the major triad, we've got major sixth, and we've got added 9 again. And this chord has a very beautiful, airy and dreamy type of sound. You can treat it just like a regular major chord, and therefore you can use the same scales on top of it. In the previous episode, I mentioned the concept of omitting degrees from the chord, and here, having the 13 chords which contain 7 different notes, it actually makes them unplayable on conventional guitar without omitting anything. But since I'm spoiled enough to have an 8-string guitar, and I will use it to try to illustrate these chords to the best of my abilities. And for this reason, I will just tune my 7th string down to A, which, luckily, thanks to the Kayla tremolo, I can do so without getting ridiculously out of tune. Now, to be honest, in my entire career, I've encountered just 3 13 chords on a regular basis, so I won't torture you with the useless variations. I will just show you the 3 main ones. So now let's start with only minor 13 chords that has a non-experimental sounding, which is the minor 13. Here we've got minor triad, we've got minor 7th, a regular 9, a regular 11, and the major 6. And here, instead of giving this anxiety like in the minor 6 chord with major 6 interval, here it's supported by a bunch of other notes, and they somehow interact with it and make it a little bit more fitting. And this chord has always reminded me of Earth Song by Michael Jackson, where we have a sequence of A minor and D major repeating. And it sounds like those moments in the adventure films where the protagonist suddenly finds new magical worlds. And this minor 13 chord gives me the same type of vibe, because technically we're like playing both these chords at the same time, and also we have a bunch of other notes which also contribute to the dreamy sounding. And this is a very prominent Dorian sound, and this of course means that over this chord we will use Dorian. Now, the major 13 chord is something that actually consists of all of the notes of the Mixolydian scale, but instead of being ordered like a scale, they're ordered on thirds. So this is what we get, and this, of course, being Mixolydian, it gives a very, very prominent dominant vibe, and more specifically, dominant in a major key. Normally, these 13 chords have omitted degrees, and often this is the 5th degree, and also often it's the 11th. So, very popular fingering for this major 13 is this thing where we don't have a 5th and we don't have 13th. And this is the shape that you can go for. And surprisingly, the scale that goes well with it is Mixolydian. The last 13 chord is actually the major 13th with no 11, which you can use as a fancier variant of the major 7th chord. And here again we are missing the 5th degree and also the 11th, because the 11th actually doesn't sound very well with this chord, except if you make it sharp 11, and then you get this very Lydian type of sound. And normally you would just play it like that, but if you want to play the full chord, you can do it like a nerd and get this beautiful Lydian vibe. And if you just go for that, you can use both the Ionian mode and the Lydian mode. And if you go for the nerd version, like this, or like this, then you are limited only to Lydian. So that's everything for today's episode, and I hope you find it useful. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments which of these 6th and 13 chords you like the most and why. And if you like my work, consider supporting me on Patreon on the links down in the description, where you can get access to many interesting things like tabs, audio downloads, exclusive materials, and other things, and the membership starts as low as $3 per month. And if you prefer to support me by a single donation, you can use the PayPal me link also in the description. If you're a first-time viewer, subscribe to my channel and click that bell notification button to get informed when I upload new video. See you next time, and remember, practice makes perfect.